Okay.
My next guest is Mark Kronenberg. Mark is a passionate math educator, small business owner, and tutor. He has had a lifelong love of learning and teaching math. Mark founded Math 123, which specializes in private and group home math tutoring and test preparation for over 25 years ago. In his career, Mark has taught math in public, private, and faith-based schools. He has taught and tutored hundreds of students, seen math education trends come and go, and has always enjoyed helping students gain confidence and competence in math. Mark holds a dual degree in math and economics from Vanderbilt University and a master's degree in applied statistics and decision-making from Fordham University's Graduate School of Business. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Well, I can think of an adult example and a child example.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just go in chronological order. When I was in fifth grade math, I was disappointed that I ended up with a B-. I wasn't a bad student. I was a good student, but just not one of the top students. So had a non-optimal year. So in sixth grade, I looked to my left and looked to my right. I looked around the room and I knew they had put me in a class with the kids who are, let's say, not so advanced. And I was very discouraged. So I talked to my teacher and I worked really hard that semester, and I got bumped upstairs to the advanced class the second semester of sixth grade. And then from there on, I was able to go on to the accelerated course in seventh grade, where we had independent learning, where the teacher basically was literally independent learning. The teacher would tutor us individually, but we were pretty much on our own. I did the seventh grade math book, went through the eighth grade math book, and started algebra toward the end of the year. So I was happy to leave the little stumbling block behind from fifth grade. So that was a good confidence booster. Plus I had a good teacher who was very encouraging and very supportive. And that was a big help too, to have a teacher / tutor who was able to help me.
Yeah, and you really took charge of your own learning as a sixth grader, it sounds like.
Right. I was, well, yeah, if you have, a setback can be discouraging at first, but it can motivate, it can either discourage you or it can motivate you. So fortunately, I was, I'm sure I talked to my parents about it, and they encouraged me to push, and I pushed myself a lot. And so that worked out okay. So temporary setback. So that was the child example. As far as a trenches example as an adult, I was brought into several years ago, it was almost 10 years ago now, I was brought into a private school to replace a teacher who had been teaching over the heads of his students for some years. And so he didn't meet the kids where they were. So they were kind of lost. They're very lost. And so I was teaching a calculus course, but it was kind of at first calculus in name only. We couldn't just delve right into calculus. It was impossible because these students were lacking years worth of skills. They had a lot of holes in knowledge in algebra and geometry and trigonometry. So we had to fill in the gaps for months. About 2.5 months into the school year, mid-November, finally we started on calculus. The kids have been asking, when can we start calculus? So I said, we got to build some foundations first. So we did that, and it was a good experience, and it was challenging. And of course, we couldn't reteach every single thing from 3 years worth of math, but I was able to fill in the gaps wherever possible from algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, and trigonometry. So that worked out okay. And I remember one of my students said, why couldn't you have been our teacher for the last 3 years? Which I was very happy to hear. And she had a sense of relief that she was getting it. This is one of a group of struggling students. She had a sense of relief that she was getting it, understanding it. And so I was happy to get the compliment. More importantly, happy that the student had just this nice confidence boost. So from a couple months of successfully scaffolding up to the point where I could teach them calculus. So
and it sounds like, you had to do a lot of catch up, but you were successful in helping those kids get to the level they were supposed to be.
Thankfully, it worked out, yes.
So I think that's been on our minds a lot in the last couple of years with remote learning and kids that have been in and out of schools. And so you own this tutoring company, and I know a lot of parents have sought out tutoring and pause and things like that. As this episode comes out at the end of the school year, a lot of parents are concerned with learning loss over the summer. So
Right.
what should a parent have their student do, especially if I would say they're going to another level that might be harder. Some, going from pre-algebra to algebra 1, or
Mhm.
geometry, going into high school math, maybe. And also are there options maybe for maybe a boot camp or something like that parents can look into?
Right. Well, ideally, you can get to a boot camp. That's kind of more of an advanced strategy. So, um, what you want to do first is fill in any gaps in knowledge that have occurred in the last couple of years. This could happen even during a non-pandemic, where students have holes in knowledge, because not every student is going to be an A student. Maybe they're a B student or a C student. So just by definition, that type of student is maybe good, but they have some gaps. Maybe it's fractions. Maybe it's some other foundational topic like factoring from Algebra 1. But whatever their foundations is, that's, you want to build, just as you build a house on a good foundation, you want to make sure the student has the foundation they need. Make sure they have reviewed properly and know the materials from previous years. Then teaching the current material, make sure you're on track with the current material, and then ideally get ahead of the game. And so a boot camp would be, we offer a calculus boot camp where, for example, but that's not the only opportunity. Of course, anybody could take a boot camp in any subject that's coming up. But what you want to do is make sure that you have an idea of what the topics are that are going to be coming up. So asking for, let's say it was algebra, you wanted to go, you used the example of pre-algebra to algebra. So sometimes a student might be very good at arithmetic or very, very basic algebra that they would see in pre-algebra, but they've never actually taken algebra before. So to get an idea of if they can get a textbook from their upcoming teacher, they get a syllabus, ideally some advanced problems to work on toward the end of the summer as the mastery has taken hold. So being able to pre-teach, if you can get a semester ahead, a month ahead, or a semester ahead, or an entire year ahead, depending on how ambitious the student is. If you want to invest a few weeks, you want to invest a couple months, you can cover a lot of material depending on scheduling. So you could have a really nice advantage over your classmates come September if you've been putting in a lot of time over the summer, and then you can just relax. And it's not that you can totally coast, but you can definitely go into the new school year with confidence. And you're essentially taking the course a second time. You have a second bite at the apple. But the first time you're taking it, it's a non-pressured environment. You're not taking it where this grade's going to go on your transcript. So that's just a nice, relaxed, non-anxiety way to approach it.
Yeah, that does sound like a good way to kind of preview the material for those students who, like you said, take a bite out of the apple. And for parents who are listening, or non-math teacher parents, what are some new trends that are becoming more popular in the past couple of years in terms of math education? What are teachers using that you're seeing maybe has been effective, that they're carrying over from remote learning, that kids have caught on to math better?
There are a good number of apps out there you can use. There are, in addition to using the smartboard, which I've gotten used to both at home, teaching from home during the pandemic, and tutoring from home from years, even pre-pandemic, just using smartboard technology has really taken the traditional notes from what I used to do, notes on the chalkboard and the notes on a whiteboard, and then it became notes on a notes on a smartboard, where the notes are PDF'd at the end and you color coded, and there's so much you can do. You can import, you can do web searches, you can import documents into it, and then it's really less it's not as just traditional notes, it's more content creation. So on any given day. And then the rule at many schools, including the schools I've been in recent years, is that the notes go up on the website every night, so students get that extra reinforcement, because not everybody can take all the notes down at once. So whether that's teaching in the classroom or tutoring, having a copy of the teacher's notes is a good idea. Not that it's replacing the students' notes. The students are still responsible to take their own notes. They can't just relax and say, I'm going to just tune out. They have to pay attention, but it takes the pressure off the students. And they, I typically would remind students, don't feel that you have to write every word down, that you're going to miss something. Take down the highlights, and then these are going to go up after class. You're going to be able to review these tonight. So encourage students to take that extra 5 minutes at the end of the day, read your notes, go through them, see if you can replicate the problems that were covered, and then the homework is going to be easier. And as far as various apps or websites out there, IXL, the letter I, the letter X, the letter L.com is a good way to have a quick way to look up problem sets for a problem area. So that's one good resource. You can look up many different math topics. I believe there are other subjects as well, but definitely math. I've only used it for math, so I can only speak to that, but you can look up many levels of math, K through 12. So if you want to look up a particular topic, you can get problem sets, and hopefully they're going to be sufficiently challenging, and it has a nice feature of a challenge zone toward the end, and it's a nice confidence booster. And so it's good to have a teacher side by side to help you when there's a problem you can't do, because maybe reading instructions from the screen, that's not always going to that's not going to be 100% effective. So having an experienced teacher or tutor in the background to help you with that as you go through that, that's a good idea. So just there's a lot of technology out there. Also, Desmos, DESMOS.com is a nice online calculator, and there are graphing features there. So that's a nice feature as well. But just the traditional knowing how to use the handheld graphing calculators, that has become more prevalent in recent years. So that's really important too. So having a teacher walk you through that is a good idea, to know how to be your own answer key for a lot of problems. Even if you're asked for an algebraic solution, there are a lot of examples where you can back it up with a graphical solution. You can see where two lines intersect, for example, and now you've solved a system of equations. So it's as if you have your own built-in answer key on the test. At least you can know if your answer is wrong, and you can, if your answer is reasonable, or if you're close. That's some nice feedback in case you missed a minus sign in your calculations or some other minor mistake. You'll know that you did the problem wrong, and you can go back and fix your work. So it's good to have, not be reliant on the calculator, but use it as a tool. A lot of students are calculator dependent, but it's a good idea to be able to really be efficient at using the calculator for when you need it, and use your mind for when you need it. So sometimes you can do a problem more quickly in the calculator than before you can even touch pencil, paper, or calculator. And sometimes the calculator is going to be more efficient, and knowing when to use which tool is a good thing. That's ideal.
Yeah, and I think that calculator, that graphing calculator, is never going to go away, despite all the apps that come out, right? Because that's something you need to buy when you're in the upper level math grades and in college.
Right. Sure.
And thanks for it sounds like those apps also help a lot of the kids that want to work on their own, because you said it will check your answer, or kind of help you work through if you got it wrong. What about for parents that are thinking, or maybe even a teacher that's helping a student find math tutoring solutions? So you've worked both on one-on-one and with learning pods. So what if a parent's looking for a learning pod for their student for math, what should they be looking for in terms of similarities with the other students?
Well, ideally, an ideal learning pod would be a situation where you already know the students. So it could be classmates, or at least people, it could be not necessarily someone at your school, although that would be ideal at your own school. It could be someone who is the same age as you, taking the same course, and maybe it's your neighbor at a different school, but you're in the same level course, and you come prepared with the same questions. So the social aspect is there, and the learning, the synergy is there. Students can work together and ask questions, and ideally they want to prepare questions beforehand with each other, so that it's not a review session where there's where they're dead hours or dead minutes. So if you just think, for example, of you may have gone to a college review session, and then the professor or a teaching assistant is at the front of the room. What questions would you like to cover? And then you have a lot of dead air and wasted time. So that's you're not going to get as much out of it. But if you come prepared with questions, and ideally you decide which questions that you have in common beforehand, so that you're then you're going to get the most out of the session. So learning pod can be good. And if you can't agree, then maybe tutoring is a better option. So it does depend. But if you can find friends who are at the same level, then just organize your own pod. That's an ideal situation socially and learning wise.
Does it tend to become difficult once you've reached like 5 to 6 students, though, that they tend to socialize too much? Or have you had a good experience with the kids being able to focus in those pods?
Yeah, typically we wouldn't go beyond 5. That wouldn't be ideal. So the socializing, as far as chit chat, that's really not an issue, because they're not in school where maybe they're distracted. They are there, and their parents are asking them, or they've maybe asked their parents, depending. But these are typically, very motivated students who want enrichment or want to catch up, depending on where they are. They're there to learn. So that's not an issue as far as a distraction kind of socialization, but just having either friends in the room or friends virtually in the room with you. You can have the camaraderie and still get things done. It's not like with the learning loss that occurred during the pandemic. It's a very different story. If you have maybe typical classroom, could be 20 or 30 students, and you have all those little thumbnails on the screen. There's no way a teacher could possibly keep track of anyone. And so there was a lot during the pandemic. There was a lot of students who kind of got lost in the shuffle. So you don't want to take it to, I have students who are even, one of my Algebra 2 students now, during the pandemic, he was in Algebra 1, and he admitted to me, I didn't even ask him, but he just on his own said, yeah, I just played video games. He played Fortnite. That's a very popular game in recent years. And this is one of my better students. He was a mid to high 90s. He's a very motivated student now. So maybe he's matured a little bit, but he also doesn't have the temptation of sitting in a room alone and blending in the background where nobody can see him, and the ability to play video games. So with a handful of kids in a learning pod, they're there to learn. So that's not an issue. So you keep the numbers small, and parents are paying for their kids to do their best, and the kids are motivated. So that's it's a good way to learn.
Yeah, I get the difference, whether it's online or in person learning pods. It's going to be a lot different than what it looked like as having those boxes and the cameras off in a class of 30 kids with the remote learning. So what about if a parent is paying for tutoring and they see that the child's not making any progress, or it could be maybe the tutor's not effective, or they feel like maybe the student is saying they don't need a tutor anymore. What are the best steps to take in that situation?
Okay, well, maybe that the tutor is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of barrier to entry in the tutoring business. So there are any number of people who can just put a website out there, put a flyer up at the grocery store and say, hey, I'm a tutor. But are they expert to the point where they can't be stumped? It may be someone who maybe they're good at math as a student, and then maybe they've been out of high school or college for 5 years and they forgot the material. They say, well, I was an A student back then, I can tutor somebody now, that's no problem. And maybe they can, but are they going to teach the student in the most efficient way, in a way that's going to build confidence for the student? If an adult is tutoring someone, tutoring a teenager typically, or a younger student, and the adult is taking an inordinate amount of time to be able to answer a simple question, that's going to hurt the kid's confidence too. And so if they're having trouble figuring a problem out, that's sometimes what parents who don't have a math background, maybe they can kind of muddle through a problem, but maybe they can't. Maybe it's been too long and they can't remember. You might have a tutor like that who can't remember the material, or maybe they can, but it took them 10 minutes when it should have taken them 10 seconds or a minute to do a problem. So just being an expert in what you're doing. Is this tutor someone who tutors all the time, who has decades of experience, or is it someone who's maybe 18 and maybe they're well-meaning and maybe they're very smart and maybe they're good, but maybe they have holes in knowledge themselves. So typically it's going to be easy to tell when to continue and when not to continue tutoring, because typically after a tutoring session, the parents and child are going to go off in a back room and talk privately for a moment, and then typically what's going to happen is if the teacher is if the tutor or teacher was it was effective, then the student is going to want that tutor to come back, because the confidence, parents can look at their own kids, they can see the confidence, it's palpable. The tutor can generally, an experienced tutor can generally see if the student is getting it, or if they have the eyes glazed over look. That can be, maybe they don't want to admit they don't know it. So some students don't want to admit they don't know something in a classroom, but even some students who are very shy might be reluctant to admit that they don't know something even in a private tutoring session one-on-one. It's not like they have anything to be embarrassed about, but maybe they're conditioned that way. They feel bad that they don't get it, so they might just yes you. So you have to, a trained tutor knows to know when a student is trying to gaslight you and just trying to move on to the next question. So if you suspect the student is not getting it, just it's a good idea to ask the student to do one problem on their own or two problems on their own or whatever it takes until they've prove that they really know it. So just humor me. Let's just try, not that you'd say that, not humor me, but you would say, well, why don't we just in case, why don't we try one more problem like this? You show me that you can do it. I'm going to do it over here. You do it over here. And then we'll check in a minute. Or in an online tutoring session, the document camera, I would lower the document camera, and then so they can't see what I'm writing. They can't see my notebook paper anymore for 2 minutes. And then we come back and then say, okay, let's check in. And then let's see how the student does. And then we can reveal the answer on the document camera, and that can be confidence boosting there. The student can see that they did well. So, but if a tutor is not effective, it could be a personality issue, it could be a knowledge issue, it could be just whether it's personality or knowledge or just teaching style. It could be, it could be just not a good fit. But typically, if a tutor is very effective, it's not going to be an issue. So I know from the tutors I've hired, I made a mistake early on by hiring tutors the way I was hired. And by that I mean, with the exception of before I tutored, before I went off on my own, there was only one exception. This worked for several companies, but the assessment was little or none. It was almost non-existent. So other than a pizza delivery job or a fast food job, it was the easiest to secure a job that I'd ever gotten, which I was a little bit surprised, but they liked my resume. They liked how I spoke. And the interview would essentially be, can you tutor algebra? I would say yes. Can you tutor calculus? I would say yes. Can you tutor SAT? I would say yes. But it was just dumb luck on their part that I was telling the truth. But I hired a calculus tutor. One of my early years of when I started business in '95, shortly after that, I hired someone who had stellar transcripts. He was an A student, college. He's finishing up college, and he sounded good, and yeah, great. So I sent him out to tutor somebody in calculus, and it didn't go well. And it went okay, but not great. They gave him another chance, and then they just didn't want to, they just weren't confident in his ability. And so as a make good, I offered them a new tutor and I offered them a refund, and I smoothed things over. And then I knew I can't hire a tutor like that anymore. So I changed the screening process to progressing anywhere from arithmetic to algebra to geometry, taking them through. And the interview could be very brief if they trip up on early things or very early math, or it could go on for a long time if they've proven to me that I can't trick them. I can't throw a question at them. I can't throw a common trap at them. throw all the ammo I have at them, and they're still getting 100% or extremely close, then I know that's someone I can work with. And so it's not that I want to torture someone during a phone screen, but typically the way a tutoring session, or rather the way a tutoring interview, when I interview tutors, it's most of the time, I would say the lion's share of the time, it has devolved into a tutoring session where I'm saying, well, you got this one wrong, or you got this one right, but maybe there was maybe the prospective tutor took a couple minutes to solve the question when it should have taken a few seconds if they knew the SAT shortcut, or if they knew the efficient mental math strategy for whether it's arithmetic or whether it's algebra. There are a lot of tricks that an experienced tutor or teacher would know, and if they don't know those, then they're going to teach a student to work slowly, and then they're not going to get their test done. And that's not going to be a good confidence booster. That's going to be anxiety producing for them, when it's supposed to be the opposite, that a tutor's supposed to help them with, reduce their anxiety.
Yeah, and I really like how you kind of pointed out, because there are a lot of tutoring companies out there today still that will use this just, really easy way to hire people, go off of a resume, and you need to have a sort of finesse in explaining the problems, like you said, especially if there is a time test the student's preparing for, SAT, ACT, or the state standardized test. And yeah, it's important to have somebody, if a parent's able to, maybe try a tutor out for a little bit, or, ask for somebody else. Like you were very generous in offering a refund. I don't know if people always would get a refund, depending on where they go, but yeah.
That's the only time I've ever had to offer a refund, thankfully.
Yeah.
I learned back in the 20th century. I haven't had to do that in a very long time.
Yeah.
Long
And
ago mistake.
yeah, you need somebody might be good at math, but just the ability to explain it to a student is different than being able to solve the problem yourself. So I wanted to talk a little bit about if you have a child who is entering higher levels of math, whether it be going into high school algebra or calculus, or a student who might be taking advanced math classes, how do parents set their children up for success in these higher levels?
Okay, well, I would say build a foundation is very important. A lot of students want to go into honors classes, and a lot of parents want to push them into honors classes. And so, first of all, meet the student where they are. Don't take a student's word for it that they're an honors student. Make them prove it. So a tutor needs to assess the student just to make sure, are they really honors caliber, or have they been in an honors name only course where, not that it would be called that, but sometimes it might not be as advanced as you had hoped. There's a lot of parents push their kids to go from regular track into honors, and that's admirable. That's a great thing. But sometimes an honors class might be filled up with a lot of students who should be there, and then other students who are pushed in there, and maybe they're pushed in over their head. So make sure that the student's not in over their head. Make sure they really have the foundation first before moving on to a higher level of math. If you've come out of honors algebra 2 trig, do you really have the background to go into, say, honors pre-calculus? Are you really ready? And a tutor is going to be a tutor or a teacher is going to know. They'll know what a student should know walking in the door. An experienced teacher or tutor is going to know what material they need. And so preparing beforehand, previewing the material, reviewing the old material, previewing new material that's upcoming, that's a good way to set up for success in the coming school year. Making sure that they're really ready, and have they tackled the advanced questions, the trap questions? Can they really handle the twists that are thrown at them? So some books will have different levels of exercises where it'll have explicitly, here's the A section, here's the B section, here's the C section, and the C level questions are the challenge questions. And if you can push your way through those and really do well, that's a good confidence booster. And then you're ready to move on to the next course.
Yeah, those seem like pretty straightforward ways to know as a parent, especially a parent who might not be at that level of math themselves, and kind of walking their student through, looking at those questions, like you said, those advanced type wording and all those types of things. And What about the opposite for a parent who has a child who's struggling with math and has math anxiety, who,
Right.
I was one of those kids in high school. I did not want to do math homework. My dad tried to help me.
Right. Right.
So what can a parent do, especially if they're thinking of getting tutoring for their child? The
Right.
child's very resistant.
Right. Right. Well, math anxiety could be from lack of knowledge. It could be from any number of reasons. I mean, we are part psychologists. The teacher or tutor is always a part psychologist, and it's important to push back on negative self-talk, especially with a student who has historically struggled in math. Um, this is student wording, but students will say, "I'm dumb in math. I'm stupid in math," and you've got to push back on that right away. So it's not just, "Oh, that's not true, you're okay." No, you need to really be firm and nice, but be firm about it. And because one quote I've liked to share with students over the years is, the subconscious is incapable of disbelief. Every time you negatively, every time you bully yourself and talk yourself down, "I can't do this," or "I'm dumb in math," you say these things to yourself, it sinks in on some level. And if you say it to yourself a few times a day for days on end, or weeks on end, or years on end, that gets embedded. So it's important for a teacher or tutor to push back on that, and just encourage the student to talk positively, and to put in the time, of course, and to do better, but just not to entertain this self-doubt. So having someone walk you through it is good. Studying with, you could study with friends who are at the same level, or maybe study with friends who are at more advanced level, to kind of push you along. Just as if you're a runner, you don't want to run. If you're, say, running a 7-minute mile, you might want to run with someone who is a 6-minute mile runner. You want to work with someone, push yourself to work with someone a little bit more advanced. So social conditioning can be part of it. So, but just, going for mastery, not just going for exposure. This buzzwords I've heard over the years are, one of them is exposure, and that's an important first step, but it's not enough. And so, unfortunately, when teachers go through the curriculum, it's not their fault. They have a very limited amount of time to push through a lot of curriculum. And sometimes students might be in over their heads, and you can't move as fast as you would like to. So you may not be able to get to all the material that you wanted to in the depth that you wanted to. So that you're not going to necessarily, the students won't necessarily have the mastery they need. They might have only had exposure. That is extremely common, and it's not the teacher's fault necessarily. It could be, but not necessarily the teacher's fault. It's just you have so many kids in a classroom and so much material to get through. So definitely push yourself, or have a tutor or teacher to push you to the point. Again, firm but nice, not being pushy per se, but have someone who's going to motivate you and help you to get to the point where you really know it, not just gloss over the material, really go for mastery.
And also, there are a lot of students who might be good at math, but they get really anxious when they have a standardized test, right? And they have that timed test. What is some is it that self-talk? Is it just managing the negative self-talk, or what are other things they can do to prepare for a time test like that?
Right. Well, you want to do everything you can to simulate real testing conditions. I was tutoring a student recently, and I asked him how long did he take to do this math section on the ACT, and he told me how long it had been. I said, "Well, you're only allotted this much time." And so you really, that's not going to have the same predictive value. So it was a few minutes over, but sometimes there are students who have told me that maybe you had a half hour in a section and you took 45 minutes and you weren't allotted that. I'm not talking about a student who has the extended time accommodation, but whatever time you were going to be allotted on test day, if you're allotted an hour, you take an hour, and then you get used to working under the gun. So you practice running a race by running, not by walking. So otherwise it's going to be a rude awakening on race day. So if you're used to working efficiently and timing yourself, you're taking speed drills, whether you're taking a standardized test or whether you make yourself a speed drill going into your geometry test or your calculus class in school. Make yourself a speed drill where you are getting used to working in a timed fashion, then that can cut down on anxiety. And of course, mastering the material, that can help too, because if you knew you were going to take a test and all you had to do was write your own name, you wouldn't be anxious. You know your name, you know how to spell it, you know how to write it, and you know you can write it in a reasonable amount of time. And if you have, say, 2 minutes to write your name, you're going to be fine. So you're used to writing something down. That's an extreme example, but there's nothing to be anxious about if you really have know the material. If you know you know the material cold, you walk in with confidence. And also knowing how to check your work is important. A lot of students are resistant to checking their work. It's tedious. They don't want to do it. Do I have a common question that a student will ask is, do I have to check my work? And although it may not be an explicit requirement for points on a test, that if you don't show a check, you might not lose a point. However, if you don't check your work, if you don't push yourself through that extra little important piece of the puzzle, then you may miss a detail. So you have to talk yourself out of the mentality of, oh, that problem's so easy, I don't need to check that one, just in case. Check it just in case. So
yeah, great tips. And I think as we're now, as a recording in standardized test season, a lot of kids tend to rush. If they're doing those tests in Colorado, we have them up to 10th grade every year, and kids tend to rush through those tests. And before they submit, they're supposed to check their work and they're supposed to, use scratch paper, things like that. But it's instilling those practices in kids, using the time. Also, there's the extreme of, not having enough time if you're doing the ACT or SAT, but also when you're doing the state testing at grade 10 and below, rushing through a test, thinking like, well, I know how to do it, but then missing something because you didn't check your work is really important to use that skill. Well, we've talked a lot about tutoring, finding the right tutor, types of tutoring situations, be it pods or one-on-one tutoring. Out of everything we talked about today on the podcast, what's one thing you like listeners to remember?
One thing I'd like listeners to remember is, well, does it have to be just one? I would say definitely
more.
I would say it comes back to foundations and mastery. There are a lot of students who think they know it, but maybe they don't. Try to build the foundations and learn how to work efficiently. So learning mental math strategies is something that's a great confidence booster, whether it could be mental math arithmetic, how to do things in your head more quickly than you could in the calculator. And that can buy you extra time at the end of a test to go back and check your work, to relax. That can reduce anxiety. So knowing how to introduce those efficiencies is definitely something that can reduce anxiety and boost success, boost confidence.
Where can people connect with you and find you online?
They can online find us at www.math123.com, and they can also call 1-888-MATH123. Easy to remember number. Those are the best ways to find us. We also do have a YouTube page, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. So those are great ways to find us as well.
Great. I'll post those links in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. I had a pleasure learning more about math strategies, learning strategies, how to help your student. Wish you a great rest of your evening.
Likewise. Thank you. Good to be here.